The day they fired me, they thought they were deleting a problem. What they actually did was activate a countdown that would cost them millions of dollars, expose a corporate conspiracy, and destroy careers that had taken years to build. I didn't know exactly how spectacular the collapse would be, but standing there beside my desk watching two strangers pack up my belongings like evidence from a crime scene, I knew one thing for certain. The people responsible had no idea what they had just unleashed. I had returned from lunch carrying a salad and an iced coffee when I spotted them. Two men in expensive suits stood near my workstation. One was unplugging equipment while the other flipped through documents on my desk. Neither looked surprised to see me. The taller one cleared his throat and offered a rehearsed smile. "Ms. Carter, we've been instructed to collect company assets. Your employment has been terminated effective immediately." Just like that. No meeting, no warning, no discussion. 10 years of loyalty reduced to a sentence delivered by a stranger. I wasn't shocked. Not completely. For weeks something had felt wrong inside the company. Meetings were being held without me. Projects I had built were suddenly being reviewed by people who barely understood them. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Still, hearing the words out loud hit differently. I looked around the office that had practically been my second home. The monitors, the whiteboards, the coffee mug I'd used for years, gone, or soon to be. I nodded calmly. "Can I grab my purse?" The men exchanged a glance and agreed. What they didn't notice was my hand reaching beneath the chair. Taped underneath was a small encrypted drive, a backup, my insurance policy. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and walked away without another word. As I passed the Human Resources Department, I noticed the company's favorite motivational slogan framed on the wall: "We succeed together." I almost laughed. The irony was painful. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone vibrated. Then again and again. These weren't text messages, they were system notifications. My stomach tightened. Unauthorized access detected. Privilege escalation attempt detected. Protected architecture triggered. Contingency mode initiated. I stopped walking. The notifications continued appearing one after another. Someone inside the company was trying to access a system they should never have touched, and that system belonged to me. Years earlier, I had designed the company's core automation platform. Officially, it was called Athena. Internally, most employees barely understood what it did. They simply knew it kept everything running. Invoices, audits, client synchronization, data recovery, compliance tracking. Athena connected everything. The executives loved bragging about it during investor presentations. What they didn't know was how deeply integrated it really was, or how carefully I had protected it. I stared at the screen. Athena wasn't malfunctioning. Athena was responding. Someone had triggered one of her defense protocols, and if that happened, it meant somebody was attempting to take control of something they didn't fully understand. I suddenly felt very sorry for whoever was responsible. 7 hours later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a familiar name: Ethan Brooks, Senior DevOps Manager. One of the few people I still respected, I answered. His voice sounded strained. "Rachel, we have a serious problem." I leaned back in my chair inside my new apartment. "You mean besides firing me?" A long silence followed. The answer told me everything. Things were already falling apart. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Our European billing system duplicated thousands of invoices. Clients are calling nonstop. Nobody can stop it." I wasn't surprised. Athena had detected unauthorized modifications. Now she was isolating systems she considered compromised, exactly as designed. I walked to the window and stared down at the busy street below. People rushed through their lives completely unaware that a billion-dollar company was beginning to implode. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Worse every minute." "And management?" "They're panicking." That made me smile. For years, executives had treated engineers like replaceable parts. Now they were discovering what happened when the person who built the engine disappeared. "We need you back," Ethan said quietly. "No," I replied. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Because I did. The company hadn't made a mistake. They had made a decision. Someone wanted me gone. The question was why. After ending the call, I opened my laptop and connected to a private monitoring dashboard. Athena's status glowed amber, waiting, observing, evaluating. She wasn't damaged, she was investigating. As I reviewed the logs, a pattern emerged. The unauthorized access attempts all originated from accounts connected to executive leadership. That was strange. Executives rarely touched technical systems. Most couldn't reset a password without assistance. So why were they suddenly trying to access the architecture I built? Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A hidden project folder. The title was simple, Project Phoenix. I opened it. What I found explained everything. For months, a small internal team had been secretly recreating my platform. Not improving it, not upgrading it, cloning it, every diagram, every workflow, every process. Someone was attempting to duplicate years of my work, and leading the project was a woman I had never heard of. Vanessa Reed, Senior System Strategist, hired 6 weeks earlier, reporting directly to Chief Operating Officer Brandon Cole. My jaw tightened. This wasn't restructuring. It wasn't downsizing. It wasn't budget cuts. They had planned this. The entire termination had been orchestrated so they could replace me with someone trained to imitate what I had built. But they had underestimated one thing. Athena recognized trust. Every critical authorization required security signatures that only I could create. Without them, the cloned version could never fully function, and apparently Vanessa had tried to bypass those safeguards. Athena considered that an attack, which meant the defense protocols would continue escalating. Hours later, another message arrived, this time from a former intern named Tyler. One sentence, "They're saying your name every 5 minutes in the war room." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. The same executives who had celebrated firing me were now desperately searching for answers. By evening, internal screenshots started appearing online. Employees were leaking messages. Rumors spread through social media, system failures, client outages, compliance issues, executive meetings. Nobody outside the company knew the full story yet, but cracks were beginning to show. Then an email appeared in my inbox. The sender made me smile. Brandon Cole, Chief Operating Officer, the man who had approved my termination. The subject line read, "Urgent Consultation Request." I opened it. The message was painfully polite. Suddenly, the executive who considered me expendable wanted my expertise. He referred to my firing as a transition, a misunderstanding, a regrettable situation. I nearly laughed out loud. A misunderstanding? They had spent months preparing my replacement. There was nothing accidental about it. I saved the email. One day it would make an excellent souvenir. Then I returned to Athena's dashboard. The amber status light continued blinking, waiting, patient, almost as if she were asking a question. Should I continue? I sat silently for several moments. Part of me wanted to end it immediately. One command would stabilize everything. The outages would stop. The systems would recover. The executives would survive. But another part of me wanted answers. Real answers. Because someone hadn't merely stolen my job. Someone had attempted to erase my legacy. And before I fixed anything, I intended to discover exactly how deep that betrayal went. That night, while the company spiraled deeper into chaos, I began digging through every hidden log, archived message, and protected database I could find. What I uncovered would prove that my firing wasn't the worst thing they had planned, not even close. And once I saw the truth, I realized something important. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of what would happen if I stayed. And very soon, they were about to learn why. The deeper I dug into the company's records that night, the uglier the truth became. At first I thought they had simply hired someone to imitate my work. That alone would have been insulting enough. But what I discovered hidden inside archived communications wasn't imitation. It was replacement. They weren't trying to build another version of Athena. They were trying to build another version of me. Every file I opened revealed another layer of planning that stretched back months before my termination. Vanessa Reed wasn't some brilliant engineer brought in to innovate. She was a carefully selected stand-in. Her activity logs showed dozens of meetings with executives where my name appeared repeatedly. They analyzed my workflows, my coding habits, my decision-making process, even my presentation style during board meetings. It felt less like corporate planning and more like reading notes from people studying a hostage. Someone had spent an enormous amount of time figuring out how to copy everything I did while making sure nobody noticed I was gone. I sat at my kitchen table scrolling through evidence while cold coffee gathered beside my laptop. Around midnight, I found a private communication thread between Brandon Cole and several senior executives. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. It was called Continuity Transition Strategy. Inside were months of conversations discussing how to transfer ownership of Athena without involving me. They repeatedly referred to me as a risk factor, not because I had failed, not because I had done anything wrong. I was considered a risk because I knew too much about the system they intended to monetize after pushing me out. One message stopped me cold. Brandon had written it nearly 3 months earlier. He said Rachel's value is tied to proprietary knowledge. If we can separate the platform from the architect, we remove dependency. The room suddenly felt smaller. 10 years of sacrifice reduced to a dependency problem. I remembered every late night spent repairing outages, every vacation interrupted by emergency calls, every family event I missed because executives promised the company needed me. Apparently they only needed me until they figured out how to replace me. Athena continued monitoring activity while I investigated. Her status remained amber, but the logs showed increasing defensive responses. More unauthorized access attempts appeared every hour. Vanessa was still trying to force her way into protected architecture layers. Each attempt failed. Athena quietly documented everything, every command, every login, every modification. The system wasn't fighting back emotionally. It was simply following instructions I had written years earlier: protect the platform from hostile control. At the time, I never imagined those hostile actors would sit in executive offices. Around 1 in the morning, a message arrived from Tyler. Unlike his earlier text, this one contained screenshots. The war room had become complete chaos. Executives were arguing. Legal teams were scrambling. Investors were demanding explanations. One image showed Brandon standing beside a projection screen filled with red warning notifications. Another showed Vanessa attempting to explain system failures, while senior leadership stared at her like passengers realizing their pilot had never flown a plane before. For the first time all day, I felt something close to satisfaction. Then I discovered the file that changed everything. Buried inside a restricted server folder was a video recording labeled Architecture Transfer Session. My hands froze above the keyboard. I opened it immediately. The recording showed Brandon, Vanessa, and several executives sitting around a conference table. The date stamp revealed it had been recorded 6 weeks before my termination. I listened carefully as they discussed transferring Athena's ownership away from me. What started as a business conversation quickly turned into something far uglier. Vanessa confidently explained that she was nearly finished replicating Athena's core framework. Brandon smiled and told the room that once migration was complete, they could move forward with Rachel's retirement narrative. Retirement narrative. The words hit me like a punch. I wasn't retiring. I had never mentioned retirement. They were planning to create a story explaining my disappearance before I even knew I was being removed. Then came another statement that made my blood boil. Brandon laughed and said employees rarely question these transitions if they're packaged correctly. I replayed that section 3 times, not because I hadn't heard it clearly, because I couldn't believe how arrogant they sounded. They weren't discussing technology anymore. They were discussing people like pieces on a board, careers, reputations, lives, everything reduced to public relations strategy. I watched until the meeting ended, then leaned back in my chair. My anger had transformed into something colder: focus. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about saving the company. I was thinking about exposing it. Athena seemed to reach a similar conclusion. Her logs suddenly showed activation of secondary monitoring protocols. Years earlier, I had created a hidden security feature designed to track suspicious activity around critical systems. Most companies would have called it excessive. Maybe it was, but now it was proving invaluable. The protocol had quietly archived months of communications connected to Project Phoenix. Emails, chat logs, internal memos, video recordings, everything. The executives believed they controlled the narrative. In reality, they had been documenting their own downfall. By 2 in the morning, system failures were spreading internationally. Client portals crashed. Financial reports corrupted themselves. Compliance tools generated endless errors. News of the outages began appearing online. Industry forums filled with speculation. Competitors were suddenly asking questions. Investors started noticing. Every minute that passed increased pressure inside headquarters. Yet Athena still waited. The platform wasn't destroyed. It was simply refusing to cooperate with people it identified as threats. Then Brandon called me. I watched his name appear on my phone. For several seconds, I considered ignoring it. Eventually, curiosity won. I answered. His voice sounded completely different from the confident executive I remembered. Gone was the polished authority. In its place was panic. He tried to sound calm, but desperation leaked through every word. He claimed they were facing unexpected technical complications. He suggested there had been misunderstandings regarding my departure. He even implied they might be open to discussing opportunities moving forward. I almost laughed. Opportunities? I repeated. Rachel, we're trying to find a solution. You already found one, I replied. Her name is Vanessa. Silence, the kind that tells you someone wasn't expecting honesty. Finally, Brandon spoke again. This situation has become more complicated than anticipated. That sentence perfectly summarized the disaster unfolding around him. They had expected a smooth replacement. Instead, they had triggered a crisis they couldn't control. I listened to him stumble through explanations before ending the call. There was nothing left to discuss. Not yet. After hanging up, I opened the video recording again. This time, I watched the entire meeting from beginning to end, every lie, every plan, every assumption. By the time it finished, I understood exactly what came next. The company wasn't collapsing because Athena malfunctioned. It was collapsing because leadership believed they could steal expertise without consequences. Outside my apartment window, the first signs of dawn appeared across the skyline. Most of the city was still asleep. Meanwhile, executives were fighting for survival inside conference rooms, phones were ringing, lawyers were drafting statements, investors were demanding answers, and sitting quietly in front of my laptop, I held enough evidence to destroy every career involved. Athena's dashboard suddenly changed. The amber light disappeared. A new status appeared on the screen. Awaiting authorization. I stared at those words for several seconds. The system was waiting for me, waiting to decide whether the people who betrayed me deserved rescue or exposure. And as the sun began rising over the city, I realized something important. The real battle hadn't started yet. Everything that happened so far had only been the warning shot. The war was about to begin.